My beloved child, don't rush past this moment. Before you scroll away, before you answer another notification, before your mind is pulled back into the noise of another ordinary day, I need you to stop, just for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you isn't meant for everyone. It's for the one who has been silently asking, God, are you still with me? It's for the one who has been smiling in public while carrying questions that no one else knows. It's for the one who has prayed the same prayer so many times that silence has started to sound like an answer. If that is you, then don't leave. Because before this message ends, you may finally understand why the season you've been calling delay was never delay at all. My child, I have watched every step you have taken. I saw the tears you wiped away before anyone else could notice. I heard the prayers you whispered after everyone else had gone to sleep. I know the disappointment you never spoke about. I know the dreams you quietly buried because waiting became too painful. And I know the question that keeps returning to your heart. Have I missed God's plan? Listen carefully. No, you have not missed my plan. But there is something you have not yet seen. You have been looking for me in the dramatic, in the breakthrough, in the miracle, in the open door. Meanwhile, I have been working where human eyes rarely look. Inside your heart, long before I change your circumstances, I transform the person who will walk into them. Because a blessing received before the soul is prepared often becomes a burden instead of a gift. That is why what feels like waiting is often my greatest act of mercy. Remember Joseph. From the outside, all anyone could see was a forgotten prisoner. But heaven saw something entirely different. Every lonely day inside that prison was preparing a leader who would one day save nations. The prison wasn't proof that I had abandoned him. It was proof that I trusted him with a future larger than he could imagine. What if the season you have been trying to escape is actually the season preparing you for everything you have been praying to receive? What if the closed doors were never punishment, but protection? What if the silence wasn't rejection, but preparation? And what if the greatest miracle happening in your life right now isn't around you, but within you? Most people will never ask those questions. They will become impatient. They will run ahead. They will chase quick answers instead of lasting truth. Don't make that mistake, because the enemy rarely destroys a life in one moment. He does it one distraction at a time, one compromise at a time, one impatient decision at a time, until people no longer recognize how far they have drifted from my peace. That is why I brought you here today, not to frighten you, not to condemn you, but to awaken you, because there are things unfolding around your life that you cannot yet recognize with natural eyes. Some doors are about to close. Others are about to open. Some people will leave. Others will arrive exactly when I appoint them. And unless you learn to recognize my voice above every other voice, you may mistake my protection for rejection. So stay with me. Don't skip ahead. Don't assume you already know where this message is going. Because in the next few moments, I am going to reveal the first sign that tells you whether you are simply going through a difficult season, or whether I have been preparing you for something that will change the rest of your life. And once you see it, you will never look at your waiting the same way again. My beloved child, I told you that before this message ends, I would reveal the first sign that your season is not what it appears to be. Here it is. The first sign is this. Nothing around you seems to be changing, yet something deep within you refuses to give up. Have you noticed it? There were days when you thought you had reached your limit. Days when you believed one more disappointment would finally break your spirit. Yet somehow, you're still here. You're still praying. You're still searching. You're still hoping. Even if that hope feels much smaller than it once did. That is not an accident. That is evidence that my spirit has been sustaining you even when your own strength was gone. Many people believe preparation always feels exciting. It doesn't. More often, preparation feels painfully ordinary. It feels like waking up and seeing the same problems, praying the same prayers, waiting through another silent day, wondering whether anything is changing at all. But my child, the greatest transformations rarely happen where human eyes can see them. Think about a seed buried beneath the soil. From above the ground, nothing appears to be happening. No movement, no growth, no evidence. If someone judged only by what they could see, they would conclude that the seed was dead. Yet beneath the surface, everything is changing. Roots are reaching deeper. Life is forming quietly. Strength is developing long before fruit becomes visible. Your life is often the same. You keep asking me to show you the fruit, while I am still strengthening the roots, because fruit without deep roots cannot survive the first storm. That is why I care more about what is happening inside you than what is happening around you. Remember David? Before anyone ever called him king, he was simply a shepherd that almost everyone overlooked. His brothers saw an insignificant young man. His father left him with the sheep. Even the prophet Samuel almost chose someone else. But while everyone was looking at appearance, I was looking at the heart. Every lonely afternoon in those fields was training David for battles he didn't even know were coming. Every lion, every bear, every quiet act of faithfulness was preparing him for Goliath. Imagine if David had abandoned those lonely fields because they felt unimportant. He might never have been ready for the moment that changed history. My beloved child, do not despise the ordinary season you are living in, the routine that feels repetitive, the unseen faithfulness, the quiet obedience that nobody applauds. Heaven notices every one of them. I notice every one of them. Nothing you do in obedience is ever wasted. Not one prayer, not one tear, not one act of forgiveness, not one decision to trust me when fear seemed easier. You call them small moments. I call them eternal investments. Perhaps you have been asking why your life doesn't look as successful as someone else's, why they seem to move ahead while you remain in the same place. Be careful, my child. Comparison has blinded many faithful people from recognizing my work. You are looking at someone else's harvest, while I am still cultivating your field. You are measuring your chapter 3 against someone else's chapter 20. But I have never written two identical stories. Joseph's journey did not look like Moses's. Moses's journey did not look like David's. David's journey did not look like Paul's. Yet every one of them arrived exactly where I intended. Not one day early, not one day late. The same is true for you. Trust my process even when you cannot trace every step. Trust my timing even when your calendar disagrees. Trust my heart even when your circumstances remain unchanged. Because what I am building within you today will become the very strength that carries tomorrow's blessing. And there is another sign that almost everyone misunderstands. In fact, many people mistake it for my absence, when it is actually one of the clearest proofs that I am closer than ever. Let's look at that together. My beloved child, at the end of the last chapter, I told you that many people mistake one of the greatest signs of my presence for my absence. Now let me show you what I meant. Have you ever noticed how quickly your heart begins to panic when heaven grows quiet? You pray. Days pass. Nothing changes. You pray again. Still no answer. Eventually, a dangerous thought begins to whisper. Maybe God has stopped listening. That whisper has caused countless people to give up just moments before they would have seen my hand move. But listen carefully. Silence has never been proof of my absence. In fact, some of the greatest moments in Scripture were born inside seasons that appeared completely silent. Think about Elijah. After one of the greatest victories of his life on Mount Carmel, he expected everything to become easier. Instead, fear found him. Discouragement overwhelmed him. He ran into the wilderness believing he was completely alone. He had seen fire fall from heaven, yet now he questioned everything. Have you ever felt like that? One season filled with confidence, the next filled with questions. One day your faith feels unshakable. The next day you wonder why your prayers seem to disappear into the silence. If you have, then you have more in common with God's greatest servants than you realize. When Elijah reached Mount Horeb, something remarkable happened. A violent wind tore across the mountain, but I was not in the wind. Then the earth shook beneath his feet, but I was not in the earthquake. Then fire surrounded the mountain, but I was not in the fire. Only after all the noise faded, did a gentle whisper come. And there, Elijah finally recognized my voice. My beloved child, do not miss what happened. I never stopped speaking. Elijah simply expected me to speak differently. How often have you done the same? You have been waiting for the miracle, the dramatic breakthrough, the unmistakable sign. Meanwhile, I have been quietly speaking through the peace you almost ignored, through the scripture that seemed to appear at exactly the right moment, through the conversation you nearly dismissed, through the closed door that protected you from a path you would later have regretted. Not every miracle announces itself with thunder. Some arrive as quiet wisdom. Some arrive as unexpected patience. Some arrive as the strength to keep walking one more day when yesterday you thought you couldn't. That strength is a miracle. There is another reason I sometimes appear silent. Because silence reveals what constant answers never can. It exposes where your trust truly lives. Anyone can believe when every prayer is answered immediately. Anyone can worship when every door opens exactly on time. But faith becomes genuine when praise continues even before the answer arrives. That was Job's testimony. That was Abraham's testimony. That was Paul's testimony. And perhaps it is becoming yours. Do you know why gold is refined in fire? Because fire never creates gold. It reveals it. In the same way, trials do not create faith. They reveal where faith has already taken root. That is why I am never afraid of your waiting. I know what is growing beneath the surface, even when you cannot see it. Perhaps today you are asking for an explanation. While I am preparing a transformation, perhaps you are asking me to change your circumstances. While I am changing the person who will walk through those circumstances, one day you will look back and realize that what felt like my silence was actually my protection. Had I answered every prayer exactly when you wanted, you would have walked into places your heart was not yet ready to carry. So don't measure my love by the speed of my answers. Measure it by the faithfulness that has carried you this far, because I have never left you, not for one heartbeat, not for one breath, not for one ordinary day that seemed forgotten. Even now, while you are listening to these words, there are pieces of your future quietly moving into place. People you have never met, doors you have never seen, answers that have already begun unfolding. But before they arrive, there is one battle almost every believer must learn to recognize. It is a battle that takes place long before circumstances change, a battle inside the mind itself. And unless you learn how to win that battle, you may mistake fear for my voice. Let's uncover that together, my beloved child. Before I teach you how to recognize my voice, I need you to answer one question honestly. When was the last time you made a decision because you believed I was leading you, only to discover later that you had been following your fear instead? Don't answer too quickly, because this is where many of my children become confused. The enemy's greatest deception has never been convincing people that I do not exist. He knows that those who love me will continue praying. They will continue reading my word. They will continue calling upon my name. So he chooses a far more subtle strategy. He whispers just enough fear, just enough doubt, just enough urgency, until my children mistake his voice for mine. Think about that for a moment. He doesn't need to pull you away from me overnight. He only needs you to believe that panic is wisdom, that worry is responsibility, that control is faith. And little by little, you begin following anxiety while believing you are following God. That is why discernment is so precious. Not every thought that enters your mind deserves your trust. Not every emotion deserves your obedience. Not every opportunity deserves your yes. And not every delay is something you need to escape. Let me show you what I mean. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture the Sea of Galilee. The wind is growing stronger. The waves are crashing against the boat. 11 grown men refuse to move. Then one voice breaks the silence. Lord, if it is you, tell me to come. Peter steps out. For a few breathtaking moments, he does something no human being had ever done. He walks on water. But listen carefully, my beloved child. Peter did not begin sinking because the storm became stronger. The storm had been there all along. He began sinking the moment he gave more attention to the wind than to the one who called him. That is exactly how fear works. Fear constantly redirects your focus. Instead of looking at my promises, you begin studying your problems. Instead of remembering my faithfulness, you replay your failures. Instead of asking what I have already spoken, you become consumed by every frightening possibility that has not even happened. Fear is a storyteller. It writes imaginary futures, and then convinces you they are inevitable. Have you noticed how exhausting that becomes? You lose sleep over conversations that never happen. You rehearse disasters that never arrive. You carry tomorrow's burdens before tomorrow even comes. That is not the life I created for you. Listen to the difference. Fear says, you need the answer right now. Faith says, be still and trust me. Fear says, if you don't fix this immediately, everything will fall apart. Faith says, I am already working in places you cannot see. Fear says, take control. Faith says, surrender. Fear says, you're alone. Faith says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Which voice has been shaping your decisions lately? The one that fills your heart with peace, or the one that never allows your mind to rest? My child, there is something many people never realize. The enemy cannot create peace. He can imitate excitement. He can imitate opportunity. He can imitate success. He can even quote scripture, just as he did when tempting Jesus in the wilderness. But he cannot produce the quiet confidence that comes from my spirit. That peace is impossible to counterfeit. It remains steady when circumstances change. It remains calm while the storm continues. It remains anchored even when the future has not yet been revealed. That is why my guidance often feels different from what your emotions expect. Sometimes I will ask you to wait when every feeling tells you to run. Sometimes I will ask you to walk away when every emotion tells you to stay. Sometimes I will close a door that seems perfect, because I can already see what is waiting behind it. Trust me enough to believe that my no can protect you just as powerfully as my yes. And the next time fear begins speaking louder than my promises, don't argue with it. Don't entertain it. Bring it into my presence. Because darkness never wins by becoming stronger. It only survives where light is absent. The moment my truth enters your heart, fear begins losing its authority. But there is one final deception that is even more dangerous than fear. It doesn't shout. It doesn't create panic. In fact, it often sounds completely reasonable. It has quietly led countless believers away from their calling, without them realizing it until years later. And unless you learn to recognize it, you may spend your entire life doing good things, while missing the very thing I created you to do. Let's uncover that together, my beloved child. There is a prayer that many people have whispered without ever realizing how powerful and how costly it truly is. Lord, let your will be done. It sounds beautiful. It sounds faithful. But very few people stop to consider what that prayer actually invites me to do. Because when you ask for my will, you are also giving me permission to remove everything that stands in its way. That is the part many people are not prepared for. They pray for purpose, then become discouraged when familiar doors begin to close. They pray for peace, then wonder why relationships suddenly become distant. They pray for growth, then question why life feels more uncomfortable than before. They pray for freedom, then become afraid when the chains they've grown accustomed to begin falling away. My beloved child, do not mistake my pruning for my rejection. There is a reason a gardener cuts healthy branches, not because he wants the tree to suffer, but because he can already see the harvest the tree cannot yet imagine. The branch only sees what it is losing. The gardener sees what it is becoming. Now imagine Abraham standing outside his tent on what appeared to be an ordinary morning. The sun rose, just as it always had. The wind carried the same familiar scent across the land. Everything around him looked unchanged. Then I spoke, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." Notice what I did not say. I did not hand Abraham a map. I did not explain every step of the journey. I did not promise that every day would be easy. I simply asked him to trust the one who already knew the destination. Can you imagine how many questions must have filled his mind? Where am I going? How long will this take? What if I fail? What if I leave everything familiar and nothing better is waiting for me? Perhaps those same questions have been living inside your heart. Perhaps I have been asking you to release something, and instead of trusting me, you have been asking for guarantees. My child, faith has never grown inside guarantees. It grows inside obedience. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not taking a giant leap. Sometimes it is simply loosening your grip on what has become familiar. There are people you have tried desperately to keep, opportunities you refused to release, dreams you continued chasing long after I quietly asked you to place them in my hands. Not because those things were evil, but because they no longer belonged in the season I was leading you into. Hear me carefully. Not everyone who walks into your life has been assigned to walk into your future. Some people arrive to teach you. Some arrive to encourage you. Some arrive so that you may become a blessing to them. But only a few are meant to walk beside you for the entire journey. Do not confuse gratitude for permanence. A season can be sacred without being forever. You have asked me many times, Lord, why did they leave? Why did everything change? Why couldn't things stay the way they were? What if one day, when you finally see your life from heaven's perspective, you discover that every painful goodbye protected you from a future you could not yet see? What if the closed door saved your calling? What if the disappointment preserved your character? What if the relationship you begged me to restore would have slowly pulled you away from the purpose I had written for your life? You see today's pain. I see tomorrow's peace. You see what is ending. I see what is beginning. That is why I ask you to trust me even when my hands seem to be taking instead of giving, because my hands never remove without preparing something greater. Remember how Jesus spoke about pruning. Every branch that bears fruit is pruned, so that it will bear even more fruit. Even fruitfulness is not the finish line. Growth continues. Transformation continues. Preparation continues. Perhaps that is exactly what is happening in your life right now. Perhaps you have mistaken pruning for punishment. Perhaps you have mistaken redirection for rejection. Perhaps you have mistaken my protection for my silence. My beloved child, if I remove something from your life, never assume it is because I desire less for you. More often, it is because I refuse to let something smaller keep you from receiving something greater. One day, you will thank me for every prayer I answered, including the answers that first looked like loss. Because what I was protecting was never merely your comfort. I was protecting your purpose. But people are not the only things I remove. Sometimes, I begin removing something far more dangerous than unhealthy relationships. Something invisible. Something that quietly influences every decision you make. Something so familiar that many believers mistake it for part of their personality, until the day I begin taking it away, and they finally discover what it truly feels like to live in freedom. Let's uncover that together, my beloved child. At the end of the last chapter, I told you that sometimes I remove something far more dangerous than the people who leave your life. Today, I want to show you what that is. It cannot be seen. It cannot be touched. Yet it has influenced countless decisions you have made without you even realizing it. It is the quiet weight of fear disguised as identity. Many people no longer say, I feel afraid. Instead, they say, that's just who I am. I've always worried. I've never been confident. I'm just an anxious person. I'll probably never change. Listen carefully, my beloved child. Fear was never meant to become your identity. I did not create you to be defined by your deepest wound. I did not call you by your greatest failure. I did not give you a future only to let your past become your permanent name. The enemy understands something that many believers overlook. If he cannot stop you from following me, he will try to convince you that your chains are simply part of who you are. Because people rarely fight against what they believe is their identity. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day for years. At first you notice the weight. Your shoulders ache. Your steps become slower. But eventually, you grow so accustomed to carrying it that you forget life was ever meant to feel lighter. Then one day, someone removes that burden. For a moment, you still lean forward as though the weight is there. Not because it remains, but because your body has learned to expect it. My child, that is exactly what happens spiritually. Some of you are still living as though chains remain, even after I have already broken them. You continue asking permission to live in freedom. When freedom has already been given to you through Christ, the battle is no longer around your hands. It has moved into your mind. Remember Gideon. When I called him, he wasn't hiding because he lacked intelligence. He wasn't hiding because he lacked ability. He was hiding because years of oppression had convinced him that survival was all he could hope for. Then I spoke words that must have sounded impossible. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Think about that moment. Gideon did not feel like a warrior. He looked nothing like a warrior. He certainly didn't think like one. Yet I called him according to who he was becoming, not according to where fear had left him. How often have you argued with my voice because it did not match the image you carried of yourself? I say, You are forgiven. You answer, but I still remember my mistakes. I say, you are chosen. You answer, but I'm not qualified. I say, you are loved. You answer, but I don't feel worthy. Can you see what is happening? You are allowing your feelings to have the final word, while my truth patiently waits outside the door of your heart. My beloved child, truth does not become less true because your emotions disagree with it. Clouds may hide the sun, but they never extinguish its light. Likewise, fear may temporarily hide my promises from your sight, but it can never erase what I have spoken over your life. There is another invisible burden I long to remove: the constant need to prove yourself. So many of my children are exhausted because they spend every day trying to earn what I have already freely given. They perform so others will accept them. They strive so they can finally feel valuable. They compare themselves endlessly, hoping that one more achievement will quiet the voice that says they are not enough. But no amount of applause can heal an identity that has forgotten where it came from. Your value was never established by people's approval. It was established at the cross, before the world knew your name. I knew it, before anyone believed in you. I loved you, before you accomplished anything. I called you mine. Stop living as though you must earn the affection I have already poured over your life. Rest in it. Walk in it. Build your future upon it. Because the strongest believer is not the one who never struggles. It is the one who remembers who they belong to, even while the struggle continues. Perhaps today I am not asking you to fight harder. Perhaps I am asking you to let go. Let go of the labels you accepted years ago. Let go of the lies spoken over your childhood. Let go of the shame that has followed you from one season into the next. Those voices never created you. I did. And my voice is the only voice with the authority to define your identity. The day you truly believe that, everything else begins to change. Your decisions change. Your relationships change. Your prayers change. Even your fears begin losing their power, because people who know whose they are no longer need to be controlled by who they used to be. But there is one final obstacle that keeps many believers from fully embracing that freedom. It is quieter than fear, stronger than shame, and more dangerous than either, because it often appears completely harmless. Unless you recognize it, you may spend years walking in circles without ever realizing what has been holding you back. Let's expose it together, my beloved child. I told you there is one obstacle that is often more dangerous than fear and more deceptive than shame. It is so quiet, so familiar, that most people never realize it has been shaping their lives for years. It is called comfort, not the kind of rest that I lovingly give my children, but the kind of comfort that quietly persuades you to remain where you are long after I have called you to move. The enemy has discovered something that many believers overlook. If he cannot make you abandon your faith, he will simply encourage you to become comfortable. Comfortable with a prayer life that has grown shallow. Comfortable with habits that slowly weaken your spirit. Comfortable with compromises that once troubled your conscience. Comfortable with living far below the life I created you to experience. My beloved child, drifting away from me rarely begins with rebellion. It usually begins with comfort. One missed prayer becomes two. One excuse becomes a habit. One small compromise becomes the new normal. Not because you suddenly stopped loving me, but because your heart slowly stopped paying attention. Have you ever been on a boat drifting across calm water? At first, everything feels peaceful. You don't notice movement. The shoreline still looks familiar. The sky remains the same. Then, almost without warning, you look up and realize you are far from where you thought you were. You never intended to drift. You simply stopped watching the current. That is exactly how many people drift spiritually. No one wakes up one morning and decides, today I want to become distant from God. It happens one unnoticed decision at a time. One distraction, one delay, one compromise, until eventually, the voice that once stirred your heart becomes faint beneath the noise of everyday life. Remember Samson? When people hear his story, they usually think his downfall began when his hair was cut. But that wasn't where it started. His fall began long before the scissors ever touched his head. It began with small compromises. Compromises he convinced himself he could control. One decision, then another, then another. Each one seemed harmless on its own. Each one whispered the same lie. Nothing will happen. You've gone this far before. You can always turn back later. But compromise has a terrible habit. It always asks for more than it first appears. By the time Samson finally realized what had been happening, the strength he assumed would always remain had quietly left. My beloved child, the enemy rarely steals your calling in one dramatic moment. He steals your attention, because wherever your attention goes, your affection soon follows. Think about your own life. What receives the first moments of your morning? What fills your thoughts during moments of silence? What occupies your heart before you fall asleep at night? Those questions reveal far more than the words you speak on Sunday, because your daily attention is slowly becoming your future. That is why Jesus often withdrew from the crowds. Imagine that for a moment. The sick still needed healing. The crowd still wanted miracles. The disciples still had questions. Yet Jesus repeatedly stepped away to be alone with the Father. Why? Because even the Savior of the world refused to allow constant activity to replace intimate communion. If Jesus guarded his quiet time with the Father, how much more should you guard yours? My child, you do not lose your first love in a single day. You lose it through countless moments when everything else slowly becomes more important. Not because those things are evil, but because they quietly take the place that belongs to me. The greatest danger in your generation is not always persecution. It is distraction. A distracted heart can sit in church, read scripture, even sing songs of worship, while thinking about everything except my presence. That is why I am calling you back. Not to religion, not to routine, not to empty performance. I am calling you back to relationship, back to the place where my voice becomes more familiar than the world's opinions, back to the place where prayer is no longer a duty, but a conversation between a loving father and his beloved child. Because once you rediscover my presence, everything else begins finding its proper place. Fear loses its authority. Comparison loses its attraction. Performance loses its grip. The soul finally begins to breathe again. But before that restoration becomes complete, there is one final lesson almost every faithful servant in Scripture had to learn. It is the lesson that separates those who merely believe in my promises from those who are willing to wait for my timing. And unless you understand that lesson, you may become discouraged just before the greatest breakthrough of your life. Let's discover it together. My beloved child, if there is one lesson that nearly every person I used throughout Scripture had to learn, it was this. My promises are often immediate, but my timing is rarely instant. That is where many hearts grow weary, not because they stop believing my promises, but because they become exhausted while waiting for them. Perhaps you know that feeling. You have prayed, you have obeyed, you have remained faithful even when no one else noticed. Yet every new morning seems to look exactly like the one before. The prayer is still unanswered. The opportunity has not appeared. The breakthrough still feels distant. Quietly, a question begins to form inside your heart. Lord, how much longer? My beloved child, that question has been asked by many of my faithful servants. Abraham asked it. David asked it. Habakkuk asked it. Even the souls beneath the heavenly altar cry out in the book of Revelation, "How long, O Lord?" Waiting has never been evidence of weak faith. Sometimes, it is the very place where faith becomes genuine. Imagine standing beside a sculptor as he begins shaping a block of marble. From your perspective, every strike of the hammer appears destructive. Small pieces fall to the ground. The stone becomes smaller, less impressive, almost damaged. But the sculptor never sees destruction. He sees revelation. With every piece removed, the masterpiece hidden inside begins to appear. My child, that is often how I work within your life. While you are asking why I keep allowing certain things to fall away, I am revealing the person I created you to become. You focus on what has been removed. I focus on what is being revealed. Remember Moses. When he fled Egypt, he believed everything was over. The palace was gone. His position was gone. His dreams seemed buried beneath 40 long years in the wilderness. 40 years. Can you imagine that? 40 years of ordinary mornings. 40 years of caring for sheep. 40 years where nothing appeared remarkable. If someone had looked at Moses during those years, they might have concluded that his greatest opportunity had already passed. But heaven was telling a completely different story. The wilderness was never my punishment. It was my classroom, because the man who had once relied upon his own strength needed to become the shepherd who would rely completely upon mine. Sometimes I prepare you for public purpose by first teaching you private obedience. What you call delay, I often call development. There are qualities that cannot be learned in moments of success. Patience, humility, compassion, dependence. These treasures are usually formed in seasons where the only thing keeping you moving forward is trusting that I am still with you. My beloved child, please do not rush the process. A fruit picked before its season may look beautiful, but it lacks sweetness. A building constructed too quickly may appear impressive, yet its foundation cannot withstand the storm. Likewise, a blessing received before your character is ready to carry it can become the very thing that pulls you away from me. That is why my timing is never random. It is mercy. Have you ever wondered why I sometimes answer one prayer immediately, while another seems to wait for years? It is not because I love one of my children more than another. It is because I see every detail they cannot. I see the conversations that have not happened yet, the people whose paths will soon cross yours, the dangers you do not yet recognize, the opportunities that are still unfolding. I am weaving together thousands of moments that your human eyes could never arrange on their own. If I showed you only one thread, it would appear meaningless. But I already see the finished tapestry. That is why I ask you to trust my hands. Even when you cannot yet understand my pattern, do not compare your waiting with someone else's harvest. No two callings grow in exactly the same season. David was anointed king years before he ever wore the crown. Joseph dreamed of leadership long before he stood in Pharaoh's palace. Sarah laughed because my promise seemed impossible. Yet, every one of them eventually discovered the same truth. I have never been late, not once, not by a single day, not by a single heartbeat, and I will not begin being late with your life. So if today you feel discouraged because nothing seems to be happening, lift your eyes beyond what you can measure. The deepest work is often invisible. Roots grow before branches. Foundations are laid before walls are raised. Character is strengthened before influence is entrusted. Do not despise the hidden season. It is there that many destinies are quietly formed. One day you will look back and realize that the moments you begged me to shorten were the very moments that prepared you to carry the answers you had been praying for all along. But there is one final truth about waiting that many people never understand. Waiting is not the greatest battle. The greatest battle is deciding what voice you will believe while you wait. Because the longer the silence lasts, the louder certain voices become, and if you cannot recognize those voices, you may abandon the promise only moments before its fulfillment. Let's discover how to guard your heart against that deception, my beloved child. At the end of the last chapter, I told you that waiting is not your greatest battle. Waiting never destroyed anyone. What destroys people is believing the wrong voice while they wait. That is why two people can stand in the exact same season, pray the exact same prayers, face the exact same delay, yet one emerges stronger, while the other quietly walks away from me. The difference is rarely found in their circumstances. It is found in which voice they chose to believe. While you wait, one voice whispers, "Nothing is happening." My voice says, "I am working where you cannot yet see." Another voice says, "God has forgotten you." My voice answers, "Can a mother forget her nursing child? Even if she could, I will never forget you." Another voice insists, "You've waited too long. It's time to take control." My spirit gently replies, "Be still and know that I am God." Do you see what is happening? The battle has never been about time. The battle has always been about truth, because whatever voice you feed will eventually become the loudest one inside your heart. Remember Eve in the garden? Many people believe the serpent's greatest weapon was deception. It wasn't. His first weapon was conversation. He never forced Eve to eat the fruit. He simply kept her listening long enough for doubt to sound reasonable. Did God really say? One question. That was all it took. Not because my word had changed, but because another voice was finally given equal authority. My beloved child, be careful what conversations you allow to continue inside your mind. Not every thought deserves a response. Some thoughts deserve to be dismissed the moment they arrive. Because the longer you negotiate with fear, the more convincing fear becomes. Jesus understood this in the wilderness. When Satan tempted him, he never entered a debate. He never defended his emotions. He answered every lie with truth. It is written. Again, it is written. And once more, it is written. Notice what Jesus relied upon. Not feelings, not circumstances, not visible evidence. He stood upon my word. That is why deception could not move him. My child, there are moments when your emotions will tell you something completely different from what I have already spoken. Your feelings may say, "You'll never recover." My word says, "I heal the brokenhearted." Your feelings may say, "You've failed too many times." My word says, "My grace is sufficient for you." Your feelings may whisper, "You're completely alone." My word reminds you, "I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Never build your future upon emotions that change with every storm. Build it upon truth that remains the same in every season. But there is another voice that many believers fail to recognize. It doesn't sound fearful. It doesn't sound sinful. In fact, it often sounds incredibly logical. It says, "You should probably wait until you feel stronger. You can obey later. Start praying more seriously next month. Forgive them when you're finally ready." It always promises, "Tomorrow." My beloved child, be careful, because tomorrow is one of the enemy's favorite words. He knows that if obedience can always be postponed, it will often never happen. The seed that remains in your hand never produces a harvest. The apology that is never spoken never restores a relationship. The prayer that is always delayed never changes the heart. Delayed obedience quietly becomes comfortable disobedience. That is why I speak to you today, not tomorrow, not when life feels easier, not when every question has been answered. Today, because every moment you respond to my voice, your heart becomes a little more sensitive to my spirit, and every moment you ignore it, another voice grows slightly louder. Ask yourself honestly, what voice have you been rehearsing lately? The voice that constantly reminds you of yesterday, or the voice that keeps inviting you toward tomorrow? The voice that magnifies your weakness, or the voice that magnifies my faithfulness? The answer to that question is already shaping the person you are becoming. So fill your heart with my word before you fill your mind with the world's opinions. Spend more time listening to my promises than to your fears, because the voice you hear most consistently will eventually become the direction your life follows. And there is one final battle that almost no one expects. It doesn't begin with fear. It doesn't begin with doubt. It begins at the very moment your prayer is finally about to be answered. That is when many people unknowingly make the mistake that causes them to miss the blessing they have waited so long to receive. Don't let that happen to you. Let's uncover that together. My beloved child, there is a heartbreaking pattern that has repeated itself throughout history. Many people are willing to trust me until they reach the final stretch. They pray faithfully for months. They endure disappointment. They resist temptation. They keep believing when nothing seems to change. But then, just before the answer begins to unfold, they grow tired. They stop praying. They lower their expectations. They quietly convince themselves, maybe this simply wasn't God's will, and they walk away, without realizing they were standing closer to the answer than ever before. My beloved child, the enemy is not always trying to stop your journey at the beginning. Sometimes, he simply waits until you are exhausted, because exhaustion often whispers the lie that surrendering your faith is the same as finding peace. But those two things are not the same. One leads to rest. The other leads to regret. Remember the walls of Jericho. Imagine the people of Israel walking around those enormous walls. One day, nothing happened. 2 days, still nothing. 3, 4, 5, 6, not a single stone moved. Can you imagine the conversations that must have taken place? Are we really doing this again? This makes no sense. Maybe we heard God wrong. Maybe Joshua misunderstood. Yet heaven never asked them to judge the promise by what they could see. I asked them to keep walking, because obedience is never measured by immediate results. It is measured by faithful perseverance. Then came the 7th day. Everything changed. The walls that looked impossible collapsed in a single moment. But think carefully, my beloved child. What if they had stopped on the 6th day? What if they had looked at those towering walls and concluded, nothing is happening? History would have remembered their frustration instead of their victory. How many people abandon the sixth day simply because they cannot yet see the seventh? Perhaps that question is for you today. How many prayers have you almost stopped praying? How many promises have you nearly buried because they seemed delayed? How many dreams have you quietly surrendered? Not because I told you to, but because discouragement became louder than hope? Listen to me carefully. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean heaven has stopped moving. There are seeds beneath the soil that appear lifeless until the exact day they break through the surface. There are babies growing in the womb long before anyone outside can see evidence of life. There are masterpieces taking shape beneath the hands of an artist long before anyone recognizes what they will become. The greatest work often happens where human eyes cannot reach. Never mistake invisibility for inactivity. I have not stopped working simply because you cannot measure my progress. Remember the disciples after my crucifixion. Everything they believed seemed shattered. The one they had followed, the one they loved, now lay inside a borrowed tomb. From their perspective, the story was over. Hope appeared buried behind a massive stone. Silence filled the air. But what they could not see was that heaven was preparing the greatest victory the world would ever witness. While they believed death had won, resurrection was already drawing near. My child, how often have you judged your own story on what felt like Friday? Without waiting for Sunday morning, do not write the final chapter while I am still writing the story. Trust me enough to believe that I can accomplish more in one moment than years of human effort could ever produce. But I also want to warn you about something. Waiting does not mean doing nothing. Faithful waiting is active. It continues praying. It continues obeying. It continues loving. It continues serving. It continues believing my word even when emotions fluctuate. Noah continued building before the rain appeared. Joseph remained faithful before Pharaoh called his name. David continued tending sheep before anyone placed a crown upon his head. They did not prepare after the breakthrough. They prepared before it. Ask yourself honestly today, if the answer to your prayer arrived tomorrow, would your heart be ready to receive it? Would your character sustain it? Would your faith remain rooted in me? Or would you begin trusting the blessing more than the one who gave it? That is why preparation matters. I am not only preparing the blessing, I am preparing you. So don't grow weary. Don't stop walking on what feels like the sixth day. Don't let temporary silence convince you that my promise has expired. The God who began the work in your life will also be faithful to complete it. And yet, there is one mistake that has caused many believers to miss my best. Even after the walls have fallen, even after the door has finally opened, it is the mistake of stepping into the blessing without first remembering the one who gave it. Let's guard your heart against that together. My beloved child, one of the greatest spiritual dangers does not always appear before the breakthrough. Sometimes, it appears immediately after it. Many people believe the greatest test of faith is learning how to wait. But I tell you this, one of the greatest tests is learning how to remain close to me after the prayer has been answered. Think about how often people seek me with extraordinary passion during difficult seasons. When life falls apart, they pray. When the diagnosis comes, they seek my presence. When the future feels uncertain, they cling to my promises. Their dependence upon me becomes deeper than ever before. Then, little by little, the answer arrives. The burden grows lighter. The opportunity finally opens. The financial pressure begins to ease. The relationship is restored. The healing starts to come without even realizing it. The desperation that once drew them close to me slowly begins to disappear, not because they intended to leave me, but because comfort quietly replaced dependence. My beloved child, never allow the blessing to become more important than the one who gave it. Remember the people of Israel after I delivered them from Egypt. When they stood before the Red Sea, they cried out to me with all their hearts. When the waters parted, they sang songs of praise. When manna fell from heaven, they marveled at my provision. Yet as time passed, many began focusing more on the gifts than on the giver. Their gratitude slowly faded. Their expectations quietly grew. What had once been a miracle eventually became something they assumed would always be there. That is one of the greatest dangers of familiarity. When blessings become familiar, Gratitude often becomes weaker. Have you noticed how easily the human heart adjusts? The prayer you once begged me to answer can eventually become the very blessing you take for granted. The home you once dreamed of becomes ordinary. The family you once thanked me for every day becomes routine. The health you once prayed would return is no longer noticed. The opportunities you once celebrated soon become expectations. My child, a grateful heart protects itself from pride. Gratitude reminds you that every good gift ultimately comes from me. That is why I want Thanksgiving to become more than an occasional response. I want it to become the atmosphere of your life. Remember Daniel, even after receiving influence, wisdom, and favor inside Babylon, he never stopped praying. 3 times every day. He still opened his windows toward Jerusalem. He did not wait until another crisis forced him back into my presence. Success never replaced surrender. Influence never replaced intimacy. That is why his faith remained strong through every season. Can the same be said about your life? If I answered every prayer you are praying today, would you still seek me tomorrow with the same hunger? Would your Bible remain open? Would your prayers remain sincere? Would worship still rise from your heart, even after the miracle had arrived? These are not questions meant to condemn you. They are invitations to examine your heart, because I care far more about your relationship with me than I do about simply changing your circumstances. Blessings are temporary. My presence is eternal. Opportunities come and go. My faithfulness never changes. People may celebrate you one season and forget you in the next, but my love for you remains constant. Do not build your identity upon blessings that can disappear. Build it upon the unchanging character of the God who never will. There is another danger that often follows success. Pride rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly. It begins when people slowly replace "God has been so faithful" with "Look what I accomplished." They stop depending on my wisdom because yesterday's victories convince them tomorrow's success is guaranteed. That is exactly why Solomon, despite receiving extraordinary wisdom, eventually allowed his heart to drift. The problem was not that I stopped speaking. The problem was that he slowly stopped listening. My beloved child, never let yesterday's blessing become today's excuse to stop seeking me. Every new season requires fresh dependence. Every new assignment requires fresh humility. Every new victory should produce deeper worship, not greater self-confidence. Always remember where your strength comes from. Always remember who opened the door. Always remember who carried you when you had no strength left. Because the moment you begin believing you arrived here alone, you also begin believing you can continue without me. Nothing could be further from the truth. Remain close to me in abundance, just as you did in adversity. Pray when life is peaceful as faithfully as you prayed when life was difficult. Seek my face when the doors are open just as earnestly as you did when they were closed. For those who remain humble after the blessing are the ones I can entrust with even greater things. And that leads us to one final question. After everything I have shown you today, how should you live from this moment forward? The answer may be far simpler and far more life-changing than you have ever imagined. My beloved child, throughout this message, I have spoken to you about waiting, fear, faith, purpose, identity, gratitude, and the quiet ways I work when you cannot yet see my hand. But none of these truths will transform your life unless they change the way you live after this moment. Knowledge alone has never changed a heart. Many people know my word. Far fewer choose to live it. That is why Jesus did not say, "Blessed are those who hear my words." He said, "Blessed are those who hear my words and put them into practice." There is a great difference between inspiration and transformation. Inspiration may move your emotions for a few moments. Transformation changes the direction of your life. So let me ask you something. When this message ends, what will be different? Will these words simply become another encouraging video you once watched? Or will they become the beginning of a new chapter between you and me? The choice belongs to you. My beloved child, do not wait for a dramatic spiritual experience before deciding to obey me. Most lives are not changed by one extraordinary decision. They are changed by thousands of ordinary decisions made faithfully over time. A single prayer offered every morning. A heart that chooses forgiveness instead of bitterness. A moment of worship before the worries of the day begin speaking. a decision to open my word before opening the world's opinions. These small choices may seem insignificant, yet they quietly shape the person you are becoming. Think about Nehemiah. He did not rebuild Jerusalem's walls in a single day, stone by stone, prayer by prayer, day after day. The broken places were restored. Your spiritual life grows the same way. You do not become spiritually mature overnight. You become mature every time you choose obedience over convenience, every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you choose faith over fear. Many people are waiting for me to completely change their lives, while ignoring the small step I have already placed directly in front of them. Perhaps you have been praying, "Lord, show me your entire plan," while I have been quietly saying, "Take the next faithful step." You do not need to know everything about tomorrow in order to obey me today. Light is only needed for the step you are taking now. When the Israelites walked through the wilderness, I did not provide manna for the entire year. I provided enough for each day, not because I wanted them to worry, but because I wanted them to learn daily dependence upon me. The same is true for you. Do not become overwhelmed by imagining every challenge that might come months from now. Receive today's grace. Walk in today's strength. Trust me with tomorrow, because tomorrow's mercy will arrive together with tomorrow's needs. There is something else I want you to remember. Do not become discouraged when you stumble. Growth is not measured by never falling. Growth is measured by always returning. Peter stumbled. David stumbled. Jonah stumbled. Thomas doubted. Yet none of them were defined by their weakest moment. They were transformed because they continued returning to me. Never allow failure to become your identity. Let it become your teacher. The enemy wants one mistake to convince you that your journey is over. My grace declares that every sincere return can become a new beginning. That is why I never ask you to walk in perfection. I ask you to walk in faithfulness. There is a difference. Perfection depends upon human strength. Faithfulness depends upon my grace. When you fall, come back. When you become distracted, come back. When fear grows louder, come back. When life becomes confusing, come back. My arms have never been closed to the child who sincerely desires to return. My beloved child, the greatest evidence that my Spirit is working within you is not that you never struggle. It is that every struggle keeps drawing you closer to me instead of farther away. That is transformation. That is spiritual maturity. That is what I desire for your life. So beginning today, pray with expectation. Read my word with hunger. Love people with compassion. Forgive quickly. Walk humbly. Trust deeply. And whenever you hear my gentle voice, do not postpone obedience, because every act of obedience plants a seed that will one day produce a harvest far greater than you can presently imagine. The beautiful future I have prepared for you will not be built through one extraordinary miracle. It will be built through countless ordinary moments, surrendered into my hands. And now, before we finish, there is one final truth I want to leave in your heart. It is the promise that has carried my children through every generation, from Abraham to the apostles, to this very moment, a promise that can still carry you, no matter what tomorrow brings. Let's hold on to that promise together. My beloved child, before this message comes to an end, I want you to carry one final truth with you. Not an opinion, not a temporary feeling, not a motivational thought that fades tomorrow morning. I want you to carry a promise that has outlived kingdoms, a promise that has carried my people through wars, famine, persecution, prisons, storms, betrayal, heartbreak, and uncertainty. A promise that has never failed, not once. Listen carefully. I have never abandoned anyone who continued trusting me. Their journey was not always easy. Their prayers were not always answered immediately. Their tears were not ignored. Their waiting was not short. But my faithfulness never changed. Think about Noah. For decades he built an ark while the world mocked him. Every hammer strike must have sounded foolish to those watching from a distance. Children grew into adults while Noah kept building. People laughed. People questioned. People walked away shaking their heads. Yet Noah was not building according to public opinion. He was building according to my promise. Then one ordinary day, the rain began. The same voices that once laughed suddenly became silent. My child, Never allow today's criticism to make you abandon tomorrow's calling. Remember Sarah? Year after year, she waited for the child I had promised. Eventually, she reached an age where every human calculation declared the promise impossible. Her body said, "It's too late." Society said, "It's too late." Time itself seemed to say, "It's too late." But I have never been limited by what human beings call impossible. When I speak a promise, time becomes my servant, not my master. Perhaps you have also reached a place where something inside you whispers, "Maybe it's too late for me, too late to rebuild, too late to forgive, too late to begin again, too late to discover purpose, too late to heal." Listen to my voice instead. As long as I continue placing breath in your lungs, my purpose for your life is still alive. Do not let the calendar become louder than my promise. Remember Lazarus. By the time Jesus arrived, everyone believed the story had already ended. The stone had been rolled into place. The mourning had already begun. People had accepted death as the final chapter. But what looked finished to human eyes was only setting the stage for my glory. How many situations have you buried simply because they remained silent longer than you expected? How many dreams have you declared dead while I was still preparing resurrection? My beloved child, do not confuse delay with defeat. Do not confuse silence with absence. Do not confuse closed doors with abandoned promises. If I have spoken, my word remains alive, even when circumstances seem completely opposite. There will be moments in your future when you remember this message. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because another storm has arrived. When that day comes, I want you to remember something. The same God who carried Joseph through prison will carry you. The same God who strengthened David before Goliath will strengthen you. The same God who stood beside Daniel in the lion's den will stand beside you. The same Christ who calmed the storm with a single command still rules over every storm you have not yet faced. I have not changed. The world changes. Cultures change. Economies change. Governments change. People change. Emotions change. But I remain the same yesterday, today, and forever. That is why your confidence should never rest upon circumstances. It should rest upon my character, because my character cannot fail. Perhaps today you still have unanswered questions. So did Job. Perhaps today you still carry uncertainty. So did Abraham. Perhaps today you still feel weak. So did Paul. Yet all of them eventually discovered the same truth. My strength is made perfect, not when you have all the answers, but when you continue trusting me without them. So lift your eyes once again, not toward the storm, not toward the opinions surrounding you, not toward your fears. Lift them toward me, because the one who began writing your story has never walked away from the page. I am still writing. I am still leading. I am still protecting. I am still opening doors that no one can shut. I am still closing doors that would have harmed you. I am still preparing a table before you in the presence of your enemies. I am still working all things together for good for those who love me. And I am still the faithful shepherd who never loses a single sheep that places its trust in my hands. So whatever tomorrow looks like, walk into it with confidence. Not because you know what tomorrow holds, but because you know the one who already stands there waiting for you. And if you will hold tightly to that truth, no storm will be able to steal the peace I have already placed within your heart, because my promise has never failed, and it never will. My beloved child, perhaps as you have listened to these words, one thought has quietly followed you from the very beginning. What if this message came too late for me? Perhaps you have been carrying that question for much longer than today. Maybe you once walked closely with me, but somewhere along the journey, life became complicated. Disappointments accumulated. Prayers seemed unanswered. The excitement you once felt slowly faded. Without intending to, you drifted, not all at once, just one small step at a time. One neglected prayer. One delayed act of obedience. One compromise that seemed harmless, until one day you looked back and realized you no longer felt as close to me as you once did. My beloved child, if that is your story, I want you to hear me more clearly than ever before. You are not too far away to come home. There has never been a single day when I stopped watching over you. Even during the seasons when you stopped talking to me, I never stopped listening for your voice. Even when you walked away believing I had forgotten you, I continued watching the road, waiting for the day you would turn back. Remember the story Jesus told about the prodigal son? After wasting everything, after making one poor decision after another, after reaching the lowest place he had ever known, he finally made a choice, not to become perfect, not to fix every mistake, simply to come home. What happened next reveals my heart more beautifully than almost anything else in Scripture. The father did not wait inside the house until his son proved himself worthy. He ran. Before a single explanation was given, he ran. Before every mistake had been confessed, he ran. Before the son could earn another chance, he ran. Why? Because love had been waiting longer than guilt. That is my heart toward you. I am not standing at a distance with folded arms, waiting for you to deserve another opportunity. I am looking for the smallest step toward me, because I have already decided to take the rest of the journey toward you. Perhaps you are ashamed of the years you believe you wasted. Listen carefully. I am the God who restores. Joel declared that I restore the years the locusts have eaten, not merely the days, the years. Think about Peter. Only hours after boldly promising he would never abandon Jesus, he denied him 3 times. The rooster crowed. Peter wept. He believed his greatest failure had become his final chapter. Yet after the resurrection, Jesus did not begin by reminding Peter of his failure. He began with breakfast. Then he restored him. Then he entrusted him. The man who once denied Christ became the man who boldly proclaimed Christ before nations. Why? Because my grace has always been greater than your worst mistake. Perhaps today you are carrying labels that I never placed upon you. Failure, broken, unworthy, too late, disqualified. Those words did not come from me. The cross already answered those accusations. When my son stretched out his hands upon that cross, he knew every mistake you would ever make, every failure, every weakness, every season of wandering. Yet he chose to love you anyway. That is not weakness. That is perfect love. My beloved child, stop measuring your future by your past. If I only used people with perfect histories, Scripture would almost be empty. Moses had a past. David had a past. Rahab had a past. Peter had a past. Paul had a past. Yet my grace rewrote every one of their stories. It can rewrite yours as well. So if today you hear my voice, do not harden your heart. Do not wait for another opportunity. Do not believe the lie that tomorrow is guaranteed. Come to me exactly as you are, with your questions, with your tears, with your doubts, with your regrets. Bring all of it, because I have never asked you to clean yourself before approaching me. I asked you to come, and I promise you this: no one who sincerely comes to me will ever be turned away. My beloved child, if you remember only one thing from everything you have heard today, let it be this: you are not walking through life alone. Not yesterday, not today, not tomorrow. I have been with you in every chapter of your story. I was there when no one else understood your tears. I was there when you celebrated victories that others never saw. I was there during the nights when you questioned whether your prayers were reaching heaven. And I will still be there tomorrow, long after this message has ended. So when fear returns, remember my promises. When waiting feels longer than expected, remember my faithfulness. When the world becomes loud, return to my voice. And when you stumble, do not run away from me. Run toward me, because my mercy is still greater than your weakness. My grace is still stronger than your failure. My love is still deeper than your darkest valley. Before we part, I want to leave you with one simple invitation. If this message has spoken to your heart, don't allow it to end here. Take a few quiet moments today and speak with me. Not with perfect words, not with rehearsed prayers. Simply speak honestly. I have always been more interested in your heart than your vocabulary. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this message, share it with them. You may never know whose faith is hanging by a thread, or whose prayer this message may answer. If these messages help you grow closer to God and strengthen your walk with Christ, I warmly invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. Together, we seek God's truth, encourage one another, and remind the world that His love is still changing lives every single day. If you feel led to support this ministry, you can do so through the links provided in the description or pinned comment. Every gift, no matter the size, helps these messages reach more people who may be searching for hope, healing, and the love of Christ. Give only with a joyful and willing heart, never out of pressure, but as an act of worship and gratitude. Now receive this blessing. May the Lord give you wisdom when decisions become difficult. May He give you courage when fear whispers louder than faith. May He give you peace that remains steady, even in the middle of life's storms. May He strengthen your heart when you grow weary. May He remind you every morning that His mercies are new. May He guide every step you take, protect every door you walk through, and prepare every path that lies ahead of you. Until we meet again, keep your eyes on Christ. Keep your heart anchored in His Word. Keep walking by faith, even when you cannot yet see the destination, because the God who called you is the God who will faithfully lead you all the way home. Go in His peace, remain in His love, and never forget, the best chapter of your story may still be the one God is writing next.